Hello, and welcome to the Boffin Buzz, the podcast for anyone fascinated by farming's future. Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Boffin Buzz. And today I am delighted to have here in the studio a farmer who I've known for many years and will be known to many of our listeners too. Keith Challen, hello, how are you?
Yes, morning, Tom. Yes, I'm well, thank you. Got web feet at the moment. We had 40 mil of rain on Monday, so it's all very wet.
Well, it has been exceptionally wet recently, hasn't it? It's been a challenging autumn. So Keith, you're manager of beaver farming, is that correct?
Yeah,
Director.
I'm the farm director or farm manager of the beaver farming company at Beaver. So just below the castle, we've got 1,200 hectares of very, very heavy clay, sort of circa 75% clay. So some of the heaviest you'll ever see. And it's wet, and it's
Yes, I do remember. It's challenging soil, if I remember rightly, Keith. And we'll come on to that in a bit. But I'm just going to very briefly ask, what if there were three key things that have helped you get your farming system to where it is today? What would you say they are?
Well, when I came, I inherited a deep tillage system, which gave us sort of a soil profile full of blackgrass. So I changed from deep tillage to shallow tillage. We moved from random traffic to controlled traffic and residue management, where we looked at an aftermarket chopper with Redicarb. And then since then, obviously, we've moved on to the SCU to help in our battle with blackgrass.
No, well, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Keith. Now, I just want to talk a bit more about the farm and your experience of farming more than anything. So, tell me, how did you get into farming? Are you from a farming family?
No, not really. I'm not from a farming family. I believe 2 generations past, the family did farm, but certainly my parents weren't farmers. I grew up in a small village in a rural area in Nottinghamshire, and farming was going on around me. And as a young boy, I was fascinated by tractors and combines, and I guess that's where it started. I never really considered a career doing anything else. I did teach farming for a short period of time in the prison service. And as I grew older, food production, environment, and everything else that went along with farming just became of interest and then almost a fascination. So, yeah, I love it. Everything associated with agriculture in the countryside.
So you were in the prison service, and then you got into farming. Just talk me through how that happened then.
Well, I'd worked prior to the prison service on sort of farms as a schoolboy, weekends feeding pigs and stacking bales and so on. And an opportunity came up within a local prison to work with inmates and do some teacher training. So I took the opportunity to get the qualification, and I worked with inmates mainly in a practical environment, teaching them how to do basic tractor driving skills, and then a little bit of classroom work, just going, through machine maintenance and so on, in a part of a rehabilitation program, just to help inmates who were interested perhaps go into agriculture post serving their sentence.
I see. So, did you then come straight to Beaver, or was there another farm sort of in between?
No, I was living. I moved from the prison I was at in Nottinghamshire to one in Suffolk, and I came home for a weekend, and I saw a friend, and he wanted to leave agriculture and follow a slightly different career path, but he didn't want to pack up the farm or rent the farm out. And I suggested that maybe we could find a neighbour and put 2 farms together, and I would do the work. And so that was the start of what became a business called Farm Eco. And for 20 years, we ran a share farming business where we shared initially fixed costs, but eventually we sort of morphed into sharing variable costs and gross margins. And it worked really well. But I guess I woke up one morning and felt that I'd taken that journey as far as it would go. Then I was approached to see if I was interested in this position I've got now at Beaver. And I thought, well, it's some of the heaviest land in the country, if not Europe. That would be a good challenge. So I thought, yeah, let's have a go.
Mhm.
The rest is history.
Yeah, I mean, well, exactly, and that is I do, as I say, I do remember the times that I visited. It's the heavy land aspects that we've always talked about, and I think that's probably something that people know you most for, is the your farming of the heavy land. Just talk me through some of the aspects of the, give me a picture of what the soil is like to farm there, Keith.
Well, most of the land around here was grassland and supporting a thriving dairy industry post-war. So we're sort of on the Leicestershire-Nottinghamshire border. It's no surprise that a huge amount of cheese came from this area and milk. And I guess that's where the business grew. So from dairy, beaver farm then went into grass nut production. So it was a big grass drying set up on site, and grass was brought in not only from the home farm but from airfields all over Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire and Cambridgeshire. And that business went on for a number of years. We also bred turkeys here. And I suppose, really, when high horsepower tractors first started to arrive from America, the business then looked to grow arable crops. So, with the sort of, average farm tractor being 30 horsepower in the 50s, that just wasn't enough. So, it was only really when they got post 100
Yeah.
horsepower they could do anything with this soil. And then the sort of history of tillage here is all based on the biggest and the highest horsepower you could buy and the best traction. So Caterpillar D8s and early quad tracks and Steigers and all that sort of thing featured, bringing the farm out of grass into cereal production.
Now, one aspect that we've talked about before, and I know that you talk a lot about in your Farmers Weekly column, and that you're kind of well known for, is your association with some of these machinery brands, and so on. And in particular, I mean, you were talking about the quad track there, and Case, for example. You've done quite a bit with Case in the past. You've got, I mean, may I say it, you got more involved in some of these machinery brands than perhaps most farmers, if you like. I get the impression that, when you've got in your head, you've got a new piece of kit in mind or whatever, you sort of research it to the nth degree, in terms of even going on factory visits and things like that. That's the impression I've got. I mean, how did have I got the right idea here, Keith? Is that the way it comes about?
Yeah, usually, Tom, I seem to have this sort of hunger to follow it through in my head to the nth degree before I push any buttons on buying kit. And that often involves more than just a rep telling you the pros and cons or a quote. And I'd got it in my head, say with Case, that I wanted to go into a controlled traffic farming sort of methodology where I was managing my compaction. I was aware that I was doing most damage at harvest with grain trailers and combines and so forth. And I like to sit down with people and paint a picture what I want and see if they can accommodate it. And I usually try and start these journeys without a brand in mind. I have a set of goals, tend to list the goals, then I look at the brands and see which brand fits the list best. And that often may take me away from what might be seen as the mainstream brands. This farm had a long association with Class combines, and they were very good, served us well, and superb backup. But in my controlled traffic plan, at the time, Class couldn't feature because they couldn't offer me a longer unloading auger to match my desire to go on a 12-metre header, or a 12.5-metre header, as it were, so I could harvest 12 metres everywhere I went. And so when I talked to the manufacturers, Case were actually very keen to sit down and talk to me, and they offered me everything I wanted. And so we were really in at the start. I was very fortunate. They flew me to the States to show me their proposal for a long unloading auger so we could unload grain on the previous tram line rather than having to come out of the tram line to suit the unloader and go back again. So, yeah, I am a bit of an anorak when it comes to machinery, and I am thorough about what I want.
Well, I mean, when you're buying a combine, especially one with a 12-meter cut, I mean, that's a serious amount of kit. So it's not particularly surprising. And just to clarify, by the way, I believe that Class now do the full width auger, specifically for
Oh
controlled
yeah.
traffic systems. But just going back to your requirements there, Keith, in terms of what you needed from the combine. I seem to recall that there was one aspect about the Case Combine that wasn't quite up to scratch, which was the chopper. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's very fair, Tom. I seem to remember combining on probably the second or third day in damp conditions, and I looked at the quality of the straw chop, and I sent a text to the harvest coordinator for Case in Europe saying this chopper's not fit for purpose, and that we need a very, very swift response to it. What can we do? And so he literally went off and had a look around the world to see what we could do to better it. And that really was when we came across Redicop.
Right. Can I just get one thing straight here, Keith? So it was Keith Challen in the UK ringing up the guy in Europe saying this straw chopper isn't up for scratch. That prompted them to look around the world for a straw chopper that was up to scratch.
Well, I guess if you put it like that then, Tom, yes, probably. I mean, Case were desperate to get a share of the UK combine market. And my advice to them was that they needed to be ahead of the game rather than catching up. And so to do so, they needed to offer the controlled traffic option. But the straw chopper really was, at the time, the Achilles heel. Residue management is so important, particularly when you're growing high-yielding crops. You get a high yield of straw, and that has a huge impact, that management, on the following crop. And so my advice to Case was, if you are going to try and be a serious player in the UK market, you need to offer something better than everybody else. And as the chopper was the Achilles heel, that was the ideal place to start. I mean, Tom, they may not have found anything, and we may have been stuck with the standard fit today. But luckily, Paul Harrison, who was the European coordinator, found Trevor and Redicop, and we were very quickly able to put something together. So the following harvest, we'd gone from not fit for purpose to industry-leading chopper.
So just to clarify there, so that's the Redicop MAV, I believe it's called, isn't it? The chopper. And when you said Trevor, that's Trevor Teaston, who's the founder and president, I think, of Redicop. What the unit that you had? I mean, what year are we talking about? Because that must have been the first year that they had a Redicop unit in Europe. Would that be right?
Yes, so that was the first season with the Axle Flow was 2013, and the not fit for purpose year. In May 2014, a crate arrived from Canada, followed by Dean, Trevor's partner in the business, and a guy who was an engineer, and we literally stripped the back end of the axle flow off and bolted this chopper on as best we could, which literally felt like a bit of farm workshop work. But I'm thrilled to say, although we had a tricky harvest with it on off a few times, it worked superbly, and the end results were well worth the first few days of pain, where we're on a steep learning curve in engineering terms, because Redicop, of course, we're used to North American and Canadian crops, where you might see, 5 tons a hectare. Yes. And we were wanting to put 12 tons a hectare through it. And we found its weakness, which was drive. The guys at Redicop were fantastic. They cured it straight away. And by the third week of harvest, we'd got a machine that was very good.
So what's different about the chop then?
So the configuration of the chopper draws the straw in using almost like a suction. If you're not careful, it will suck everything off the sieves. That was one of the first things we noticed. But it draws the straw in a random manner, And because of the layout of the blades and the way the straw's drawn in, it actually lacerates the straw lengthways as well as chopping it across the stem. So if you imagine a conventional straw chopper, usually if you get a handful of straw, it's a bit like a drinking straw that's been cut up into bits. But the Redicop will lacerate it lengthways, which then allows the bacteria to start and latch on and break down the straw far quicker. And in that initial year, we halved the time it took for the residue to break down, which for me was massive. It really was huge. And in the field, at one point when it was wet, we'd got a crop of green wheat and a crop of yellow wheat following the trial between the conventional chopper and the Redicop. It was that obvious. It looked almost like a seed variety difference or a nitrogen trial, or, it was that obvious. And the only difference was the straw chopper.
Interesting. Now, you touched on one aspect there that I was going to ask you about in terms of you actually did a proper farm trial of this, did you?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to trials. I seem to trial everything every year. And I always think, if you're really going to evaluate something, you've got to measure it. You've got to have a starting point, an end point, and then you can put a value to it. Putting a Redicop chopper on a combine wasn't for free. There was a cost to it. And so we needed to evaluate what the benefit was versus what the cost was. But I think it was so obvious in the initial trial that we never really worried about what it cost because the benefit to the following crop was so good. We were able to do it without reducing the combine output. So as far as we were concerned, it was a win-win.
Yeah. So in terms of doing farm trials then, Keith, what would be your tips for doing an effective farm trial that actually gives you the information that you need? Because obviously that's a huge area for Boffin. All of our members, our farmer members anyway, do on-farm trials. We're always looking for better ways to improve and things. So in terms of from your experience, what are the key things that get you a success from a farm trial?
Well, I think firstly, you've not got to be frightened to have a go. Get stuck in and have a go at whatever the trial is. I think the main drivers are, A, don't react too much on one year's results because there may be an anomaly that you've overseen. 2, try and use the same soil profile if you can. So just make sure your P's and K's and pHs, are similar, and that the soil texture is similar and your conductivity is similar. So you are actually, comparing like with like. There's nothing worse than doing a trial and it crosses over into a different soil type, for instance, and then your results potentially are flawed.
Yeah.
And replicate if you can. We have a number of fields on the farm here we know are consistent, and we use those predominantly for trials just because I'm fairly confident the results will be accurate.
It's one of the aspects, especially if you're doing, like product trials and things like that, tramline trials or nitrogen trials, is doing that tramline strip. Or even worse, or even better, should I say, the replicated tramline trip. How do you manage that? Is that a problem for you? Who's actually doing those trials? Is that yourself, or have you got an operator who's good at doing this?
They're usually by my design, and it frustrates my sprayer operators when they go into a nice sort of 30-hectare field, and then I say one tram line or 2 tram lines in the middle want a different program. Yeah, it could frustrate them in their effort to get big output days. But the team here are good. They understand what I'm trying to achieve. I'm trying to take the farm forward, keep us profitable, and try and employ best practice. And in those situations, you've got to do on-farm trials. It's not a case for me of whether we should or shouldn't. We do it, and we do it every year. Now, I would probably argue that a third of my trials resulting in me not carrying out whatever it may be I'm trying. But, I learn as much from what I don't know as I do. Or no, that's not right. I learn as much from the negative trials as I do as the positive.
Yeah. And one thing I remember about your place is you've got a weighbridge, so you can measure results over the weighbridge. Do you think that? I mean, not every farmer has a weighbridge. Do you think that's an important aspect of the trials?
I think for me it is. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you've not got one, it's tricky, and you'd have to look at perhaps yield map on a combine to get, an idea. But yeah, we try and be fastidious in putting trial samples over the weighbridge, just to see what we've got. And we often use the weighbridge to calibrate the yield monitoring on the combine, so we're fairly confident that we're within a couple of
Sure.
percent. And even if you're not on the yield monitor, in theory, the differences should still be the same. Even if the totals aren't quite as accurate as you'd like. So you
Yeah.
can do it, and I have done it. I have done it one year. We had the weighbridge fail, and we worked off yield maps.
Right. I see. So having it's not a you don't need a weighbridge, I guess, to do on-farm trials, but it's useful to have. It would be
Yeah,
the message there, I guess.
yeah. It wouldn't stop me doing it, Tom, if I
Yeah.
didn't have a weighbridge.
Oh, right. Yeah. No, absolutely. Now, one thing I do want to talk about is something that I know that we both share an interest in, not for all the right reasons: blackgrass and grassweeds in general. As you know, Keith, I struggle with blackgrass here on my farm in Oxfordshire, and I know that you've had your fair battles with it as well. So just tell me, how talk us through your struggles with blackgrass.
Yeah, I consider myself a champion blackgrass grower, and some of my neighbours, I'm sure, would echo that. In some years, we've grown fairly impressive crops, and it still disappoints me that I can't find a positive use for blackgrass. But anyway, there you go. So we are a wet farm, we're a high magnesium farm, and we're a high clay content farm. As a grassland farm in the 60s, we had shallow drainage. The high horsepower that took us out of grassland destroyed most of the drainage. Some's been renewed, but we are a wet farm. We mow plough, we subsoil, but we still struggle. So really, we are utopia for blackgrass. High mag, very wet. So yeah, blackgrass is my number one problem, without any shadow of a doubt. And every time I think I've about got it beat, it kicks me, and I get taught a lesson that we're not quite there yet.
Right. Yeah. No. Well, that's what I was going to say. That because you apply quite a bit of sort of methodology and so on to a lot of the work that you do at Beaver. And we've already talked about your choice of machinery and so on, and then your on-farm trials. How does your approach to blackgrass fit in with that? I mean, have you taken the same approach with how you approach blackgrass?
I've tried to, Tom. Yeah, I do struggle sometimes and find myself being reactive rather than proactive, and I don't like being reactive. But different weather patterns have thrown up different blackgrass results. And as an example, we planted our cereal crop in September 2022. It went in well. We put on our pre-ems and post-em herbicides, used the new BASF product Luximo. And the full farm walk in February showed that we'd got the least blackgrass we'd seen in my time of being here, in the 15 years I've been here. We're all very excited. From that point in February, we went to the wettest March on record for us. And we had a humongous flush of blackgrass, as did a lot of other farmers around the country. And we went from being the cleanest we'd been to our highest number of flowering heads on the farm that we'd had for 10 years, all in the space of 12 months. So we went from patting ourselves on the back to must do better.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I mean, what I found interesting about that, Keith, is that you actually know what sort of level of blackgrass you're getting. Is that something that have you been monitoring populations quite carefully then?
Yes. I mean, if you look back over the 15 years, I've gone from being fastidious, where I've sort of mapped pockets in fields and retained that data year on year to see what's happening, through to really trying to change the way we think about blackgrass and how we can stimulate it to grow, and in what area
Yeah.
are we getting best results. As an example, if we spray off blackgrass in a growing
Right.
crop, we often find we don't get the germination in that area again. So I think long term that's going to feature for us, particularly as green on green technology comes along. But the key for blackgrass for us is we need to be attacking it from all angles and wean ourselves off a reliance to use chemistry
Yeah.
exclusively.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, now that leads very neatly into a project that we've got going at the moment, which you're involved in, which I'm thrilled about. So this is harvest weed seed control,
Yeah.
and the idea of this is it's a new window on blackgrass control. And it's about so this is again putting it's a unit that goes on the back of the combine and it mills the seed that comes out the back of the combine into a fine dust. Now we know that what goes into it, 98% of it will be there within the unit. There are some things that go around very, very quickly and beat the seed up, basically making it unviable. And it renders it 98% unviable, what goes into it. What we don't know is what's coming in the front of the combine. So now, the great advantages of harvest weed seed control is that you're not relying on any chemical control at all. It's not even glyphosate. It's reducing your dependence on glyphosate. And it's a new window on grass weed control as well. So this is obviously at harvest time. It's the seed that's remaining at harvest. And we've got a project going on at the moment. What we've realised is with this technology, Keith, it's used quite extensively across Australia and Canada, especially, but also elsewhere around the world, especially where there's drier climates, you might say. Hasn't really been used very much in Europe. And we've got very little data in Europe on how much weed seed is actually standing at harvest. And this is when we started looking at harvest weed seed control. This was a few years ago that we realized just how little data there was. So that's been the aim of our project, Harvest Weed Seed Control. It's an Innovate UK funded project. The other partner that we've got involved in this is NIAB. And so Will Smith from NIAB has been very much involved in looking at sampling weed seeds prior to harvest. And another person that is involved in the project, who we've been involved with for a couple of years now, is ReadyCop. And they make the seed control unit that we've been looking at within this project. So last year, before the Innovate UK funded project started, ReadyCop fitted 3 units to 3 combines around the country. So we had Jake Freestone in Gloucestershire, and he's got a John Deere combine. We've got Adam Driver over in Suffolk with a Class combine. And then we had Ted Holmes, Velcourt Farmer in Warwickshire, with a New Holland combine. And we did the first year of trials last year. We got what was interesting about it is that it was a fairly tame harvest, if you remember, but they got on really well with the units, our 3 farmers, in terms of managing the European crop. They got on really well. There was about a 10% extra fuel use from running the unit, they reckoned, but it was 10% that was worth it because they got a good result out of it. And we'll have a look in more detail at some of the results that you can expect from this in a bit. But one of the comments that Adam came up with, for example, was that he got really good control of volunteers, which was really useful for him, especially because he follows his wheat with winter barley, a malting winter barley, and he needs a good sample in that. And obviously volunteers in that are a problem. So moving to this year and the trials that you've been involved in, Keith. So as I say, one of the things that we have very little data on is how much weed seed is standing at harvest. And so, if you remember, what we did is we put the word out to people and said who would like to take part in this. And people who wanted to take part became seed scouts. The idea being that you monitor the seeds at harvest. In fact, we came up with 3 different protocols. And there were the first protocol was that you take the seed head, you look at the crop when all of the seeds are out, but they haven't yet browned off, haven't started dropping seeds, and you do a count. So you take 20 heads, and then you take them back, and you strip all the heads off, and you count up the seed. And I have to say, I did this, by the way, Keith. I don't know whether you did this particular one, and it takes forever. And I really pity the weed scientists who do this as part of their job. So that was protocol A, if you like. Protocol B was to measure the seed head and make a note of it. So you take 20 seed heads again, and you measure it, and you can get an estimation of how many seeds are on there. And with each of the protocol A and protocol B, you then repeat that the day before harvest, literally the day before. And so obviously some of the seeds will have fallen off, and you're measuring the difference between what the seed was at the time, when it was fully out, and how many seeds were left standing at harvest. Gives you a really accurate idea. The third protocol we came up with was you just monitor it at harvest, and you give a rough percentage of how much is left in the ear. So my first question to you, Keith, was which protocol did you follow, or did you follow all 3?
Well, I followed the first protocol, Tom, where we selected some ears pre-seed drop, and my agronomist very kindly offered to count them and double count them to ensure he got accurate data. So we felt that was probably for us the best way, and I have to say I was very pleased when he offered to take that out of my hands. But he too, like me, is very interested in this project, so we did that. And I think the thing that interests me is how much variation there is between fields and timing, because the field we had in the trial, we were probably slightly later harvesting that than others. And so I want to do the trial again next year, but I want to take a field that I'm going to harvest early or even first versus one I harvest later, just to see what the variation or the spread is across harvest.
Now, I think you did another sort of trial within a trial of this as well, I seem to remember. Applying pod stick to it, is that right?
Yeah. So obviously we've used pod stick in the past with podded crops, and that latex covering holds pods together. And I just wondered if that could offer anything to our blackgrass ears, to see if we could potentially just stick the seed to the ear for a little bit longer. And so we did a trial, and there was a small advantage, but it was only small, and arguably probably similar to the cost of the product. So, but that's year one. And as I alluded to earlier, you need to do this several years before you draw real conclusions.
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, it's interesting you say that, actually, because so this is the second year we've been running this trial, and Will did a few seed counts. So it always in the past it's been Will who's been doing the seed count, rushing around at harvest, trying to get hold of farmers and sample the seeds before they take the combine into the crop. Very difficult for that to happen, and that was the whole idea of this trial. That instead of getting the weed scientist out onto the farm, could the farmers themselves do the monitoring? And that was one of the things that we wanted to find out, because obviously it's much more convenient if the farmer, before they actually start harvesting in the field, just gather 20 ears. But obviously the protocol has to be correct to make sure that we get accurate figures. So how did you find it? Was it inconvenient doing that count just the day before harvest or the day of harvest?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I see it as being crucial because for me, blackgrass has an impact on my business. So, it doesn't matter how I value my time. That was time well spent. I say my agronomist did it. I think,
Right.
within certainly an hour, he got a magnifying glass and he'd counted them. The year that the seeds left. So
Mm.
he and I would both consider that time well spent.
No, absolutely. Now, I haven't actually got your individual results. I think we got in total, we had 25 samples. We did actually send over 40 packs out. So if you're listening to this and you received a pack and you didn't send back a sample, you must try again next year. And do better, please. But we will be. I hope we will be repeating this trial next year for those people who would like to be involved in it. And it does give you some interesting results. I don't have your individual results in front of me, Keith. I'm not entirely sure, due to GDPR or whatever, I'm allowed to see your individual results. But can you remember what sort of percentage that you got?
Well, the field we used as the trial, we felt we'd retained about 5%, which is a small amount. The year before, we felt there was, because we've been looking at this anyway, we felt we'd retained more. And we have noticed over the years that it can vary depending on when the blackgrass germinates, when it flowers, the weather pattern at that time of year. But even with 5%, if I can control that 5%, that's massive. We know it's well publicised. You need 97% to stand still. So if I can control 5%, then I consider that a big win.
Yeah, well, I can tell you exclusively, because I've just recently had the results through from Will, that the actual results on blackgrass were 20 to 25%, which I think sounds encouraging. Will reckons that's about right. He says that's what he would expect. We did actually have, when the few samples that we did last year, he got a higher percentage retained. I think it was, from memory, it was about 34%. But that was on very few farms. And also, it was a bit of an odd year last year. It was very early harvest. So we weren't sure whether that was representative. But we think this figure of 20 to 25% is about right. And I have to say, if you believe that your 5% was worth it, then 20 to 25% would definitely be worth it, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, that's huge. And don't forget, I was late harvesting to the field that we chose for the trial, and some of the wheat we harvested earlier with blackgrass, and it would have had that 20 to 25% of seed retained. Yeah, this is huge, Tom, really huge. And when we're looking at like I say, 97% control, this could be one of the final missing pieces of the jigsaw. And of course, there's no known resistance to steel yet, so it's good.
Yeah. No. Now, the actually blackgrass is not the key weed to control with harvest weed seed control. The ones that we're focusing on most are Italian ryegrass and meadow brome, which are weeds that are rising in their menace, if you like, and the threat as well of resistance, especially in ryegrass, is rising as well. Now, I don't think you've got a problem with ryegrass, Keith, but you have got a problem with meadow brome. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's virtually no ryegrass, touch wood, on the farm currently, but meadow brome, as we've sort of changed our herbicide policy over the last 5 or 6 years, has become more and more of a problem. And yeah, the brome retains its seeds at harvest, virtually all of them. And so for me, that's another key target. And of course, brome, first year you see it, there's a scattering, second year there's a few more. And all of a sudden, if you're not careful, it soon becomes a problem. And I haven't quite got to a point where we felt it was probably yield robbing, but it was on the horizon. So the fact that the seed control unit will deal with that is an added bonus. And I'd also like to echo what Adam said about volunteers as well. For us, volunteers are a problem. So, it's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, one thing I ought to clarify here is, I don't think I actually mentioned it, that of course you now have an SCU for the first time this year on your combine, and you've moved away from case as well, I believe. So tell us about your combine and the unit you've got on the back.
Okay. Well, we run Fendt tractors, and Fendt approached me a couple of years ago to see if we would like to work with them on their flagship combine, their Ideal 10. I felt we'd probably run the course with Case. The Case had been very good to me. The product was very good, but the Fendt offered me more output, and some technology that we were interested in. It ticked all my controlled traffic boxes, and they'd brokered a deal with Geringhoff where I could have a Draper type header. So yeah, we swapped from Case to Ideal, and we took one of their flagship combines. But we did take a slight step backwards in that the chopper on the stock chopper on the Ideal wasn't as good as the MAV we'd had from Redicop on the axle flows. So when we were able to join the Boffin trial and run an SCU, I was thrilled to see that it was also going to have to be fitted alongside an MAV chopper. So now we have the best of both worlds. We've got a very high output combine with a huge amount of power, which has been able to swallow up the additional chopper and SCU with no restriction on output. So at the end of the first season, I have to say I am thrilled. We've gone literally all season with only one belt failure, which I consider a win when you see this is a new product. There are not many hours behind it on an Ideal. So yeah, all very encouraging. And already I can see a reduction in volunteers where we've gone from either beans to wheat or wheat to beans, where it's obvious. So yeah, very good.
Fantastic. Yeah, no. Now, there's one thing that I noticed when I saw you in your combine cab, Keith, is that, the first thing that stands out in an Ideal 10 is there's no steering wheel. Isn't that right?
Yeah, well, at the time, I didn't quite know what to think. I'd driven a loading shovel years ago with a joystick and found it to be superb. And I thought, well, it's a no-brainer. Let's have a go. In the field, it is incredible. It has sort of revolutionised the headland management. On the road, I think the first time out was a little bit interesting,
right.
and we didn't go very fast. But as confidence has grown and I've become sort of more used to driving it, it's brilliant. I certainly wouldn't go back to a steering wheel. And I'm pleased to see now that Fendt are going to offer it as an option on some of their bigger tractors.
Really?
As an add-on, so you can have both in effect. And I think, there again, it will be superb.
Yeah, no, well, that's fantastic. I tell you what, just before we move off this topic, because I know we want to talk about some other aspects of farming as well, just to let you know the results that we got on the meadow brome in particular. So the meadow brome, we got 50% retention, which Will was a bit disappointed by. He thought it was going to be higher. And in fact, in previous years, the results he's had have been higher than 50%. What did you reckon? Did you, from your figures, did you do meadow brome as well, or was it just blackgrass?
We did meadow brome for our own interest because obviously taking part in the trial with you actually sort of made Martin and I think, well, let's try it on the other weeds. We actually felt we'd probably got nearer 80% of meadow brome on the ear when we harvested.
Really?
But the fields we cut first were our worst meadow brome fields, so that'd be early in harvest.
Yeah, no, well, that tallies with what Will thought. He thought it would be higher than that. So it could just be an anomaly of the year. Other figures, Italian ryegrass, 40 to 50%. And again, Will was a bit disappointed. In previous years, we've had much higher percentages of ryegrass. And again, that could be the year. We're not entirely, obviously, what we're hoping is that we're going to be repeating these year on year, and we'll get a much more definitive idea. But the main difference we've got here with these figures is because they were taken over a large number of sites, relatively large. 25 samples is a wider survey than we've done of this type before in the UK, I believe. They also looked at wild oats. And the results there were not good at all, 5%. And in fact, Will would echo that. He says, although the heads are there and you think there's seed there, but actually if you inspect the heads, there's very little seed within the head. So 5% he wasn't that surprised about. And I don't think there were any other. Oh, sterile brome, 40% retention with sterile brome, but he had very few samples. I haven't got the actual figures with me, but there were very few samples there. So unreliable data on that one. The other aspect of this, which was pointed out by Stephen Moss, is that, and I don't know whether this is just Stephen Moss being a snooty researcher, but he said in terms of doing the sampling, obviously it's up to the farmers to sample the heads. Were they just going to the heads that had the seeds in them, or were they taking an adequate number of heads to be representative of where all the seed had shed? So what do you reckon? I mean, this kind of pitches researcher against farmer here, which I'm a little bit worried about, if I'm honest, Keith. I do believe that farmers can be equally as good at sampling as researchers. But what's your feeling? Do you think you were drawn towards the heads that? Oh no, it was Martin who I think he was your agronomist who was actually doing the sampling.
I was there when he selected
what do you think?
The heads. I was there when Martin selected the heads, and we tried to take what we felt was a representation of the field, and so we weren't random about it, and then we marked it with canes. So we went back there, and we viewed the sort of, the locality of where we were, and if we don't make the effort, Tom, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So I would argue that most farmers, if they're prepared to take the heads and enter the trial, then they're certainly going to make the effort to get the best results they can from doing the effort, from making the effort.
No, I'd say so too. So, so there you go, Stephen. According to Keith and I, farmers are equally as good as weed scientists at sampling their seed. So, but anyway, listen, we've been rattling on for ages, Keith. It's been a fascinating conversation, but I know that there's another area that we wanted to talk about, and this relates back to what you were saying at the start. The sort of key areas that you are really focused on in your farming. So, just remind us, what are the sort of key things, the main things that sort of keep you awake at night, if you like, about your farming system?
Well, of course, Tom, all this is only possible while we remain profitable. So, we've got to have that in the back of our minds all the time. And as we seem to be moving through a period of extreme weathers, too hot, too dry, too wet, I want to manage the risk to the business. And particularly as our farm is heavy clay, we consider ourselves to be a high-risk farm. So I need everything we do going forward has to sort of cover both of those issues. But I also want to embrace technology and research going forward and make sure that what we do is best practice, is serving the environment to the best of our ability, and keeping the business as future-proof.
Well, I mean, it's all very well to say those sorts of things, and it all sounds very laudable and so on. Obviously, remain profitable, risk management, and so on. Embrace R&D. But what does that actually mean? How do you put those aspects into practice? How does it affect your day-to-day management of the business?
Well, I guess what it does do is make us very aware of the circumstances we're in, and we are probably doing more reviewing of the business today than we've done at any period in the past since, wheat was £60 a tonne and we were working with set aside. There's an opportunity going forward to enter into the SFI scheme with DEFRA, and as a business, we've identified where we think our risks are. We have fields on the farm that historically are less profitable, and a number of fields that actually, when we've drilled down into it, are not profitable at all. And in the last 10 years, may well have only been profitable 50% of the time. That the other 50%, they will have actually made the better fields, worse just by reducing the average. So, to remain profitable, we've got to manage the risk. Managing the risk means we're going to take the fields out of production, put them into something like a leguminous fallow, where we can still manage blackgrass through the rules of the scheme and hopefully increase soil fertility. and take an element of risk out of the business. So if we can maybe look at putting 15% of the business, 20% of the farmed area into an SFI, we will. And I think technology is allowing us to review those fields and, trying to remove emotion. I like that field because it's such and such, or it's easy because it's there. But actually, it may well, not be right. And in terms of the embracing technology, or some fascinating things. There always has been. That's the beauty of farming for me, is that, there's always something amazing around the corner. And as technology increases and we can identify weeds in crops and then have the ability to take those weeds out of crops, however it's done, whether it's mechanically or whether it's done with glyphosate or anything else, then, that in itself will help you de-risk the business and remain profitable. So the three go together as far as I'm concerned. But working with people like yourself, Boffin, is, to me, part of that building resilience and managing my risk. So this business is open to all the latest technologies.
No, great. Well, I'm glad you said that, Keith, because it leads me into the thing. I just wanted to highlight something that we're looking to start sometime in the new year. So, as you know, we're already running quite a few of these research programs. Not just in harvest weed seed control. We've got slugs going on. We're also doing some work in pulses as well. In the new year, we are starting a new project called Truth, which is Thriving Roots Underpinning Total Soil Health. And this is looking at the relationship between wheat roots and the soil biology. And I hope we get involved in this one, Keith. It'll be really interesting. And all of these projects, what we're doing with these projects is it's farmers doing the research on farm and being paid to do the research on farm as well. And what we're looking to do increasingly is to start up platforms where we've got, sort of 10 to 30 growers who are following a similar protocol, putting technologies through through trials and so on, and looking at them in quite some detail, and setting up, as I say, these platforms. Now, we've got an idea, going back to grassweed control, to start up a new platform for grassweeds. So the idea is GRASP. This would be so Grassweed Resilience Alternative Strategies Platform. That would stand for. It's a consortium that we're hoping to put together over the next few months and put in for funding. The idea being that this is non-chemical control. So obviously harvest weed seed control fits in there, but all sorts of other technologies as well. And there's sort of new technologies coming through in terms of what you can do with robots, spotting the weeds within the crop. And then treating them not without chemistry as well. And we've got some really interesting technology, like root wave that electrifies the weed. There's also concentrated light, CLAWS as it's called, concentrated light technology, which focuses a bit like focusing the sun's rays, to burn the weed and things like that. Could those technologies be the way forward? There's also RNA disruption that they talk about, so applying something new to the blackgrass that actually disrupts the seed altogether, and those sorts of things. Emerging technologies, different things that you can bring into the mix that will focus in on grassweed control, and it's a really important issue. I think the cost to the industry is about £500 million a year, so there's a lot to go at here. That we can improve. And of course, we are very reliant on chemical control, very reliant on glyphosate. And even glyphosate itself is hanging on by a thread, both in terms of its approval status and in terms of its resistance status. We know that resistance to glyphosate does exist in other countries, I hasten to add, but we are seeing increased tolerance to resistance here in the UK as well. I wanted to mention that because that's a consortium that we're looking to bring together. We've already had some discussions with various potential partners on this. It would be researchers as well as practitioners in terms of commercial companies that are involved in this space, and of course new companies as well with new technologies. So I just wanted to get an idea from you, from what you've heard of what I've said there, Keith. I mean, if you were putting together a team to look at this in some detail, and we're talking about a large, 3 to 5 million 4-year program here potentially, who would you like to see in that mix?
Well, I think, as you've already highlighted, Tom. Well, firstly, can I say I'm in? I want to be part of that because it's right up my street. But yeah, I think you need some experts in there. You need the farmers in there, and it would be nice to see some of the chemical companies embrace a non-chemistry solution, because they must know the writing is on the wall long term, perhaps for chemistry. So I think as long as you've got a balance and you've got plenty of farmers in there, because I think one thing farmers are good at is keeping everything grounded and real. We have a real idea of what we can do, what is achievable, and what's practical. And so I think you get the balance between academia and hands-on grassroots, and then if you can get a bit of technology input from the technologists, then I think you've got a good balance.
No, well, that is, as I say, a key feature of all of the research programs that we have with Boffin, is that they are farmer-led. They're very much farmer-led, and it's about that interaction between farmers and the researchers and the technology innovators that I hope is bringing results with the trials that we do. But look, Keith, we could go on all day talking about this, but especially things like blackgrass and grassweed control and so on. But we've really run out of time. So just to say thank you so much for all of your views and all of your involvement in this, and the time you've given. Just briefly before we go, Keith, where is this all going? What do you see in the future? What would you, what's the sort of main change that you'd like to see happen within arable farming over the next, 5 years?
I think if we can reduce our reliance on chemistry and use AI technology and some of the technologies on the periphery, if we can get that mainstream, then it can't come fast enough as far as I'm concerned. I have no hesitation in managing a fleet of robots or drones or whatever I need to do if I can wean myself off the chemistry, because we know it makes sense for everything, whether we're talking human health, whether we're talking environmental benefits, it makes sense. And that technology is here. So, yeah, let's embrace it and get our heads around it and get it into practical scenarios where we can use it.
Brilliant. Well, that's what Boffin's all about. Listen, Keith, thank you again so much for joining us and for your time and for your thoughts as well and experiences. So that's it for this episode of the Boffin Buzz. We'll be back again next time. Look out for it for another episode. I can't actually remember who we're talking to next time, but I think it will be another really interesting farmer who's involved in on-farm trials, another Boffin member. So thanks again to my guest today, Keith Challen, and we'll see you again next time. So thank you very much and goodbye.